Hi there, I'm Eric McRae, also known as Asparagus Party in Tree of Savior on the Clypida server, making posts to my anime and gaming commentary channel, today focusing on the topic of the game Tree of Savior, namely the question of whether or not this game is an option you should consider as viable or entertaining for 2022 or 2023. Now, stopping for a moment to also remind that I do have a donation page. If you're interested in helping out my channel to grow or throwing a donation my way, it would be very much appreciated. You can find it at the accompanying link, and of course there'll be an image of it put up on the screen. But if you do not wish to donate, you're under no pressure to do so. And I won't think any less of you. If you enjoy the content, whether you do this or that, please consider subscribing. Now, getting into this, Tree of Savior officially launched back in 2016. It first came in inaugurated sort of with a Founders Pack. I believe the founders, those who purchased the Founders Pack, they got to play the game a bit earlier than the rest of us, apart from the issues of questions like beta or whatever, and get a bit of a head start, and had some special items and maybe a feature or two to accompany. I did not purchase the Founders, but I did join shortly after the launch, the general free-to-play launch in 2016, and started getting into the game. I can't tell you how long I played at the time or the progress I made exactly, because at some point I quit the game, and it was a period where I was in general quitting gaming for some time to sort of become a little more serious in life and focus on some other things. And at the very least, gaming was not viable for me at that time until later, when I had sorted out other matters that were important to me. But I would later return, and that'll be part of the story. So I think maybe I quit Tree of Savior around 2017, or perhaps the latter end of 2016. I can't remember exactly. Some details I do remember. My character had made it to perhaps somewhere around level 200 or 282, something along those lines. It was a cleric class. And at that time, as I recall correctly, IMC had begun to announce the coming of the Inquisitor class along with some others in our English channels, although it had not been yet fully released to the version I've been playing. This would have been around the time I quit. By the time I returned to the game, much time would pass. I'd first poke back maybe 3-4 years later, around the time when COVID restrictions and lockdowns were happening. This probably would have been 2020. Popped in for a bit and noticed that I had been granted all kinds of goodies as a returning player status from IMC, notwithstanding, and not the least of which is a level up card to level your character, jump level it to 400 plus, which I started playing a little bit. I didn't really know what I was doing, but at that time I didn't really feel like I was into it, so I put the game down again and uninstalled it and tried other things. And so this was a time obviously where I was getting into gaming again, not surprisingly during the restrictions. It's an interesting detail, but not to distract. Later I would get into it again, something about it drawing me in around, I think, 2021. Pardon my fuzzy memory. I lose track of time sometimes way too easily, or maybe the early part of 2022. But what I do know is when I returned, I started really checking out what had changed, and I really began to grasp from those who were helping me learn the game that what I had played back in 2016, 2017, and the current game I was playing, 2021 or 2022, was quite different. The end game was very different. back when I played before. Dungeons like catacombs and stuff like that constituted where you'd get high level gear. Many of the contents that are currently were stuff that was preeminent before the phase where Vasilisa content was kind of released. That wasn't even probably released yet or frequented at all. So there's been several phases the game went through and the server went through while I was away. And so something you want to know that's interesting is when you get to level 460, 470, and now 480, there are gear features of this game that function as what you would call a meta within the meta, or even a game within the game. They fundamentally change the nature of your character and its various skill interactions. Certain components of gear pieces, certain effects and things you do on them make these later levels a very different beast from everything that was there before it. This is especially evident with the stuff you could do with the Vasilisa gears, the level 460 gear, but also carries over into all the new variants that get added afterwards and have been added. So what this meant is, if you were familiar with the game, in other words, if you were playing the game when I quit and got back into it, you'd still have to relearn the game all over again. And if you were playing way back when, you'd also notice the skill system was completely revamped. Not the skill system, sorry, I take that back. I mean the class system, the advancement system. It was completely revamped, remodeled. It's quite different, whereas before you had a concept of ranks and leveling up your ranks and a lot of class unlocking, things like that going on. In this case, very few classes seem to be unlocked, and the unlocks are easy to achieve, and rather you can pick almost immediately once you have the viable class points or whatever is the requirement. You can immediately pick the classes you want to advance to, and that is quite different and quite an interesting feature. So how does this all relate to a new person trying to come into the game? Well, what it means is there's a bit of a learning curve here. If you choose to, I don't even know, to be honest, this is an interesting thing. I haven't made an alt in a while. I don't even know if you start out at level 1 anymore, given some of the changes. But if you did, you'd have a big learning curve to sort of deal with at these levels. But also, now apparently it's openly provided, in the very least, you can just level skip, and most people will level skip as soon as they start playing the game. It's meant to get you into the content where the players are. So something I want to bring up, if you're the type that likes an adventure, you like the idea of going through those early starter areas, meeting new peoples, just like having an adventure, forming a band, getting together with these other players, you're not going to encounter a lot of that leveling up from level 1, if you can even do it anymore, I'm not sure. You wouldn't encounter that. The populations in those areas where you do the quests, everything before like level 400, are abysmal and virtually non-existent. Most of the time you'd be soloing. That part of the game is pretty much effectively nullified with the modern Tree of Savior. So if you're into that, don't expect to enjoy too much of that. It's not exactly the fun experience it once was. Whereas when I had played back in 2016, that was very much a part of the game. You meet new people as you're leveling, going through those various areas. Now it's quite different. In terms of efficiencies in the game and advancement and competitive nature elements, I'd say that Tree of Savior occupies a very interesting territory, being that it is a MMO that comes from Korea. I'm used to Korean MMOs being very ungenerous, so to speak, or not generous. They typically have a lot of gambling kind of features. They have a lot of sort of elitist mechanism set up for leveling, not just leveling, but for character ranking systems and things like that. It tends to be run in a way where, not always, but a lot of times it's run in a way where a casual player is very crippled and punished, and a person who's not virtually obsessive over the game would be treated like an outcast. Tree of Savior doesn't exactly work that way. And now, while you might be enthusiastic about that, if you're somebody who's only looking to play a couple hours here and there, it's not the extreme opposite either. While it's not overly punishing compared to what it could be, and while it is quite generous, it is still not like something you can be part of all the major content, like, say, when I played Guild Wars 2 back in 2013 and 2014. It's not a game you can just pick up and immediately be a part of the clique of where the most competent players are and sort of have a lot of fun in that. It will take quite some work to get into that still. Mind you, there have been improvements in this. So, for example, the gearing grind, or rather acquiring the high-level gear for your character and the various elements of it, this has seen improvements over the past months. Things like acquiring Vasilisa scales to make Vasilisa gear have been greatly eased up. Weekly boss raids now offers rewards to a lot more than just the top 10, and the rewards, are substantial. The joint strike raids are an efficient way to make some amount of silver and lead you into the Goddess Grace event, which, while it does constitute some amount of gambling, has a fairly decent frequency to get you useful vouchers for endgame content and things like that. Things have been modified to make it a little easier for the person who's trying to get into that clique of the people who would, for example, currently be occupying the top 100, 150 on the gear score. It's made it easier to become part of the community, but it still takes quite a bit of work. So, for example, you have goddess cards. Now, this isn't spoken about so much now because it's kind of not so new anymore. So there's a card system in Tree of Savior. You have legend cards, and as you would have picked up just now, goddess cards and other types of cards that are kind of work like a gear piece, in all honesty, functionality wise for your character. These cards have to be leveled up. They have certain effects. The goddess cards are one of the most important of these, and for a long time getting these has been and was, and probably still on some level is, quite a miserable feat, in terms of, even if you dedicated hours of your time trying to do everything you could to get these goddess cards and speed up the process was very, and has been very, time gated. You have to gain reputation in certain areas. You have to do certain things to get the reputation, and while there are events and certain things that speed it up, it takes, in all honesty, at least a couple weeks and possibly a few months to get the reputation to acquire your goddess cards. Now, I want to acknowledge this. Back before the recent changes with the introduction of level 480 and the new season coin of Vacarine coins and how that works, acquiring goddess cards was really, really frustrating. It's a lot easier now. It's not easy per se, and minus the debate whether it should be easy or not, but it is better. Back then it definitely would have been more likely for it to take months than weeks. You weren't just time gated by the fact that you were limited by, for example, the amount of reputation you can get in a day, which there are mechanisms like that. For example, turning in certain items you can exchange for reputation with the various NPCs of the Orsha areas. Those are limited per day or per week or something along those lines. You can't get a certain amount of reputation too quickly. But that wasn't the only limitation. At that time, before the level 480 patch, Actually, you are also quite limited in your ability to acquire kingdom reconstruction coins, which help in obviously leveling up your goddess cards and getting them to begin with. Now, in the current version, it's a much easier and more comfortable thing to acquire the kingdom reconstruction coins, which speeds it up. And it's probably, arguably, I think, a little more easier to acquire the items you use to increase your reputation. However, it is still a time-gated process. It requires quite a bit of hours. Other gearing elements are still relatable to that. You will be having a lot of work and time involved in working on your relic. So there's this item called the Res Sacré Crown, or the relic. It's an important part of your character's damage output for endgame content like weekly boss raid, joint strike raid. Previously, this was agonizing to work on this. It was a nightmare for everybody. Even the people who are the most enthusiastic people in the game, not many of them enjoyed working on this. Now, content has been added to make it easier. We can get jackpots, for example, in the Res Sacré dungeon to help us get more materials to level these crowns up more quickly. And though a lot is better, it is still kind of a tedious process. It's not exactly enjoyable. While it might feel fun for a while going back into the Res Sacré dungeon, or raid rather, and seeing yourself score 1500 or 750 breaths of power when you land a jackpot and make you feel like you're going somewhere, realistically it still takes quite an investment of your hours to accomplish the finishing up of your Res Sacré crown. Currently, after playing for quite a few months, mine's only level 15. I could definitely get it up faster than I am now, but I will admit I'm not finding pleasure in running this even with the changes. It's not that it's difficult, but that it's just not very invigorating as an experience. It really feels like a job, and a lot of the gearing elements of this game, they feel like a job, and in all honesty. I could say the same for enhancing your gear, evolution stones. One fundamental change in the recent patches was, for example, the nature of how we grind for evolution stones and various helpful items like enhance aids has changed quite a lot. Previously, you could invest a lot into Unknown Sanctuary, the second floor, and do very well in there pretty quickly, but now it's very geared towards single target DPS builds, and it has quite an investment to succeed there, which has pushed most people to farm in the Magic Association Assembly area. This is not a big deal, as its drops are actually quite fantastic. It's not like it's an epic loss, but what it does mean is that evolution stones do feel perhaps a bit rarer at times, though that might be debatable. And you're basically down to more of a matter of RNG for your evolution stones than it feels like it was before. The rates were enough that at least if you did Unknown Sanctuary runs daily for a couple days, you had a decent chance to maybe get one. That is not happening anymore with the changes in there, which I'm not going to go into in this video. So overall, my experience has been that gearing up doesn't, it probably never feels particularly enjoyable for any MMO in all fairness, but in this one it does feel pretty exhausting. It can be quite a bit of a marathon. So I hope this hasn't been too indirect or too lengthy a video for you. Something I want to say to sort of sum it up is, in my opinion, after having played for almost a year, a couple months since my return, Tree of Savior is a pretty good game. There's a lot going in its interest. One thing, it's got that kind of manga, anime kind of style to it, and almost a rustic Castlevania look in its stylization. It's pretty pleasurable in a lot of ways. You've got a fantastic system in terms of variety for classes, you have a lot of potential to discover new metas and new fundamentally powerful functions for what forms viable classes for certain content. It offers you a lot of versatility. It offers you a lot of fashion and outfits and the ability to form a character that's rather unique and stands out, and that can feel rather quite rewarding. But given its time investment, in my opinion personally, let's say you're a family man or a family woman with those responsibilities attached to you. If you're looking to have a little bit of gaming in the midst of your very busy, responsible life, I would not recommend Tree of Savior for you. Like, my personal conviction is that if I had a wife and children right now, I would not have time for this game and its demands at all. That's just honestly how it is. You could theoretically do it, but you're going to harm what you're building up in terms of your own most important things: your family, your spouse, your children. Attention they need from you will be sacrificed for this game if you play. So I don't recommend the game unless you are single and prepared to be able to dedicate some time to it. And even if you are single, I still would not recommend the game to anybody, or just everybody, but rather I'd ask you to consider what type of experience you're looking for. If you're looking to have something where you can quickly be a part of the community in its active content and be playing with them frequently, joining them on Discord and understanding everything they're talking about and just having a good time, Tree of Savior is probably not the best game to turn to. It has too much investment requirement for that. I would look elsewhere. There are other MMORPGs where the gear grind is easier. There are other games where you can be more engaged with other humans and people a lot more quickly than Tree of Savior. However, if you do like that kind of rustic anime style, if you do like games with a lot of classes, if you liked art styles of character sprites kind of representative stuff like Final Fantasy Tactics, this might be an enjoyable game for you. There's a lot going on here that can be a nice counterbalance to the sacrifice. PvP can be enjoyable, that's for sure, though it has its bad moments as well, and I'll go into that in a minute. The game has redemptive factors for its weaknesses, but it will come off as a kind of niche or a click game. Not everyone is going to enjoy this. I have other concerns around PvP. So I actually really enjoy PvP. I've been doing a bit of Team Battle League. I've attended a few guild territory wars now. And while I do really enjoy PvP, there are things I do not like about it. For one, it's all time gated. Again, just like getting your goddess cards, just like a lot of other things in Tree of Savior, it's administrated in a very controlling and at times odd way. So you can only... Team Battle League is the general form of PvP apart from Guild Territory War. It pits you in a battle of 3 players versus 3 players, randomly match-make teams according to whatever algorithm they're running. And it's frustrating because obviously, for one thing, you're stuck on a very small and static map. There's no objective besides just wiping out the other team. It's on a time limit. And you can only enter Team Battle League at set times in the day. And oddly enough, though it specifies when these times are, there are times that seem to be, I don't know if I missed something, but when I look at the description, I see Team Battle League sometimes pops up as an option at times that it didn't specify. So maybe it pops up 3 or 4 times a day at different time sequences, but the intervals are always just 2 hours of interval. When PvP is viable, you can only do, or rather Team Battle League, for 2 hours, which means that if you're working during those hours and coming home too late, you're not going to even have the opportunity to enter Team Battle League. Usually how this ends up in the Clypeda server is 2200 to 2400 or 10 to 12 server time, that's the only time where Team Battle League ever happens. And even then, it doesn't always happen because of, sadly, a low interest among an already rather low population on the server. And in terms of Guild Territory War, you again have the same problem along with others. Guild Territory War only occurs on Sunday nights. And apart from that, you don't really have PvP options. You don't have an open PK map. You don't have some random map with objectives like World versus World in Guild Wars 2. You don't have anything particularly engaging that where you can enter any time of the day. That is something to be concerned about if PvP is something you're looking to be a part of and functionally enjoy. There are debates on the balancing in PvP as well, but I'm not overly concerned with it because I'm honestly convinced that, for me in the very least, at this point of my growth as a person, I see the ability to play games, MMOs, and PvP in them as a luxury, and I'm not looking to endorse an attitude of always being discontent and complaining. However, if you are looking to succeed in PvP with just any class, you will find it is gated towards certain classes, and that might play a certain frustration toward you. These are all things you want to consider if you're going to get into Tree of Savior. It is very much the kind of game that if you get into it, while it can certainly be addictive, it does become one of those 1200 hour plus kind of games very quickly. So consider wisely what you do with it, because in all honesty, in all probability, it will become something you invest a lot of your time in, possibly your money. And using a general equation of money as a representation of time and the value of time, you'll be investing a lot into Tree of Savior, and you probably won't get that much back. Other games that are larger and more popular, like Overwatch 2 and things like that, you might be able to make a Twitch stream account or find some way to sort of monetize it to get some amount of your investment of money and time back to you. You probably won't be able to have the same boons or benefits with Tree of Savior as well. I have a great deal to say on it. Besides these, I don't know how much more I can put into it. And normally I don't like to make videos this long, but sometimes I just like to put out all my thoughts. So in this case, I'll let it slide. But I'm going to try to keep it a lot more brief. One other thing I wanted to cover before that's going to feature as sort of a con of the game is certainly resets for your skills, for your class, changing class advancement, bundling that all together. Resets are not currently very well functioning in the game. It's hard to explain because if you get counted as a returning player, possibly as a new player, I don't know what systems they have for just new accounts, but returning players get easy access to resets. You get a 1 TP cost reset package in your TP shop, and there's a certain amount of TP you can get according to a limitation in the game daily, where you can buy a few of these a day, even if you don't buy TP with real life money, so to speak. But anyone who's not counted as returning player status, they don't have this same grace. And what that means is if you're the type of person who likes to switch between class types frequently, if you like to use a lot of different skills, test out builds in PvP, you absolutely are punished, unfortunately. The best you'll have going for you is the occasional event where you can purchase a reset for some amount of materials obtained from the event in exchange to help expedite the process. But other than that, you'll be spending a good amount of real life dollar value buying TP to buy resets. This is obviously frustrating because what it really does mean is resetting your skills and changing your class has been turned into a moneymaker by IMC. That is the honest assessment, and I know I myself and many others are quite frustrated with that decision making. Personally, I don't hate them for it. I understand as they are individuals running a business. They do need to make an income out of their investments in time. I understand why they would choose this route. I don't think too low of them for it, but on the same hand, if you're looking to play a game and invest in your real life money in their sort of cash shop system, this is typically a function you're not going to ever find enjoyable, not when you have this much class variety to choose from and to experiment with. This is not something people are going to find pleasure. Now, in their defense, there are other events where you get a more significant amount of free resets. Typically, when they do a major rebuild of a class, introduce new classes, or a new class or several new classes, or have a lot of skill rearrangements and modifications of skills or arts tied to those skills, they'll have a reset NPC who can assist you with that. However, these are at least a few months between each patch, and you're not going to get them every time you want them. So that is something that serves as an issue. Now, I want to get more into strong points because I feel like I've definitely pointed out a lot of cons, and the few pros I've pointed out were kind of generic on things like the anime style, stuff like that. What are some other fun things about Tree of Savior? Well, for me, honestly, something I find to be one of the most fun elements of Tree of Savior, and perhaps the most addictive, is the engagements with its player-based community. And I think this might be part and parcel with a reality where Tree of Savior, especially certain servers, maybe even more than others, it's often a game that you could kind of say in a manner of speech, it's a game on edge. Its population is not all that high. A lot of decisions IMC made for the game cost it a lot of potential population. As long as they run it, they always have a potential from some income out of it, but it's not going to be continually growing over time in all likelihood. And what that means is there's always a question of uncertainty. How long will this game even survive? It's always on sort of a shaky ground with its player base, even though if you consult sort of pro long-time players, guys like Azasagi and various others who might be in the top 30 gear score, for example, kind of guys, they'll happily tell you that a lot of them will, that were very pleased with the changes with the Vasilisa and the endgame content. They made a lot of things lighter in this game and more enjoyable. And then you'd say, if they made a lot of good content recently, why are you saying the game is not likely to sort of grow its population too much over time? I could be wrong, but the reason I put forward that realization is that's what it looks to me, is that these changes came, as good as they may be, obviously probably come too late. The amount of competitors with similar styles and maybe executing things a little better through the advantage of having learned the lessons that from the losses of Tree of Savior, so to speak, I don't see that the game will be able to survive for that long. I would be shocked if otherwise, though who knows, maybe it'll always have a niche. And now, how's that relevant to the community? Well, it means that the community is like, what's the image of that character? And I don't like to invoke anything of Greek mythology typically from my background, but I think the guy's Atlas, who sort of has the planet on his back. The community of Tree of Savior has the game itself on its back in a very real way. And what that really means is it does become kind of a tight-knit community. And if you spend time with a level head and a good personality, meaning not too weak as a person, easily pushed over, but not too compromising either, friendly and approachable, open discussing with people, might have very different ideas and variety of things, you'd probably get along with anyone anywhere, but especially it's probably going to apply in Tree of Savior. You can, if you're dedicated to that, you enjoy the community, you can easily graft yourself in among them and find your place among them, and they're probably quite liable to be rather accepting They definitely are big on having new players come in and returning players come back, especially for those who have been doing their best to see the game to some amount of length of time and success. The community is having more engagement too now than before, as Tree of Savior IMC rather launched an official Discord some time ago, which has definitely helped bring more of the community together, as well as there's a lot more interaction probably. Mind you, I could be wrong because there were a lot of years I wasn't here, but I've noticed, for example, I'm a member currently of the Impetus Guild, but I get invited to the Discords of other guilds, some we even do guild wars with, and we're able to get along quite well. That's good news. There can be certain toxic people and toxic moments for sure, but there's a lot of good moments, a lot of friendly people, if you know how to spot it and appreciate it when it passes you by. That obviously plays into me as part of the addictive element. Of course, I like people. I'm definitely not identifying as a materialist. People fascinate me, they attract me, and I definitely have some investment in the community of this game, personally. I'm trying to think if there's any other gameplay element that might be particularly appealing. But for me, I hate to say it's not coming to mind at this time. Not that there's none there, but I think those would be sort of the most forward things. So this might be a video that's way longer than it needed to be. I don't know if it'll help you or not, but I hope it's helped clarify the viability of this game for all. That's all for today. God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.